They say change is the only constant, but that sentence is usually spoken by people who have already survived it. In real life, change doesn't arrive as inspiration. It arrives as loss, as uncertainty, as the quiet collapse of what once felt familiar. For some, change feels like growth. For others, it feels like danger. Not because they are weak, not because they lack ambition, but because their nervous system learned long ago that stability was safety and movement meant pain. This fear rarely announces itself loudly. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm just being practical," or "now isn't the right time." It disguises itself as loyalty to routines, people, identities that no longer fit. And slowly, without drama, life begins to shrink. What happens inside a person who wants more, but feels safer staying still? Why does the unknown feel heavier than dissatisfaction? And why does remaining the same sometimes feel like the only way to survive? This is not a story about laziness or resistance. It's about protection. Let's begin. Stillness is rarely chosen because it feels good. It's chosen because it feels familiar. There is a particular kind of comfort in knowing exactly how tomorrow will disappoint you. The routine pain, the predictable emptiness, the quiet dissatisfaction that never surprises you. For someone who fears change, familiarity is not boring. It is stabilizing. It is the emotional equivalent of standing on solid ground after learning that the floor can collapse without warning. Change asks for movement, and movement, once upon a time, came with consequences. So the mind learns a quiet rule: don't touch what's working, even if it's barely working at all. This is why people stay in jobs that drain them, in relationships that stopped feeling alive years ago, in identities they outgrew but still recognize. Because known pain feels survivable. Unknown pain does not. There is a myth that people who avoid change lack courage. But courage has nothing to do with it. What's really happening is calculation. The nervous system is running a silent cost-benefit analysis, and it keeps arriving at the same conclusion. Staying is safer than risking collapse, even when staying hurts, especially when staying hurts in a way that can be managed. Stillness becomes a shelter, a place where expectations are low and disappointment is already accounted for, a place where hope doesn't rise high enough to break anything. But there is a hidden cost to this kind of safety. Over time, stillness hardens. What once felt like protection begins to feel like confinement, like living inside a room that slowly gets smaller, but so gradually that it's hard to notice. People who fear change don't usually say, "I'm afraid." They say, "I'm fine." They say, "It could be worse." They say, "At least this is stable." Yet beneath those words lives a quiet mourning. For versions of life that were imagined but never tested. For paths not taken, not because they were unwanted, but because they felt too dangerous to touch. Stillness at first is a pause, but when it lasts too long, it becomes an identity. And the most painful part isn't the lack of movement. It's the slow realization that safety, when overused, can turn into its own kind of loss. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a gentle erosion of possibility. Fear of change is never born in the present. It is inherited. Long before adulthood made it look like caution or practicality, it was a response to something that once went wrong. Something that shifted too suddenly. Something that took away what felt essential. For some, it was chaos disguised as childhood. Homes where stability was temporary, where promises dissolved without explanation. For others, it was a single rupture. A loss, a betrayal, a moment when trust collapsed faster than it could be processed. The mind remembers these moments not as stories, but as sensations. Tightness in the chest, a sudden drop in the stomach, the feeling of being unprepared. So it learns, not consciously, instinctively. Change becomes associated with danger, with abandonment, with overwhelm. And the brain, whose primary job is survival, not fulfillment, adjusts its strategy. It decides that sameness equals safety, that predictability is protection, that if nothing changes, nothing can be lost. This is why people who fear change often appear responsible at a young age. They learn to anticipate problems before they happen. They become vigilant, controlled, emotionally self-contained. But underneath that composure lives a child who learned that uncertainty had consequences. This fear is not dramatic. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, "Last time you tried, you paid for it." It says, "Remember how that ended." It says, "Better to endure than to risk." And because the danger was never properly named or processed, the fear spreads. It no longer attaches only to big disruptions. It attaches to opportunities, to choices, to doors that open without guarantees. The past quietly begins to police the future. This is how people confuse trauma responses with personality traits. They say, "I'm just not someone who takes risks." They say, "I like stability." They say, "This is just how I am." But what they are really saying is, "My nervous system learned a rule, and it has never been updated." The fear of change is not a flaw. It is a memory that hasn't realized time has moved on. And until that memory is acknowledged, not fixed, not forced away, just understood, it will continue to shape choices from the shadows. Not because it wants to limit life, but because it once had to protect it. The brain does not care if a life feels meaningful. It cares if a life feels predictable. This is where the fear of change becomes misunderstood. From the inside, it doesn't feel like fear at all. It feels like logic, like caution, like maturity. But beneath that reasoning, a quieter system is at work. The brain is constantly scanning for threat, not only physical danger, but emotional disruption. And change, by its nature, carries uncertainty. Uncertainty means the absence of data. And the absence of data is interpreted as risk. So the brain sounds an alarm. Not a loud one, a subtle one, a tightening, a hesitation, a sudden list of reasons why now is not the right time. Even positive change triggers this response. A new opportunity, a healthier relationship, a chance to step into something larger. Because the brain does not evaluate change by its promise. It evaluates it by its unpredictability. This is why people can feel anxious about good news. Why excitement is often paired with dread. Why the body resists even what the mind desires. To the nervous system, familiar discomfort is already mapped. It knows how to survive it. It has rehearsed the pain. But unfamiliar possibility has no map, no guarantee of safety, no clear exit. So the brain defaults to conservation. It chooses what is known over what is better. What is controllable over what is expansive. This is not self-sabotage. It is efficiency. The brain would rather keep a person slightly unhappy than completely unprepared. And when this alarm goes off repeatedly, every time change is considered, the body begins to associate movement with stress. Heart rate increases. Thoughts race. Energy drains before anything even happens. Eventually, the person stops calling it fear. They call it intuition. But intuition feels calm. This feels tense. What's happening is not wisdom guiding choices. It's protection interrupting them. The tragedy is subtle, because from the outside, life looks stable, functional, reasonable. Yet inside, something remains untested, unexpanded, held back by a system that never learned the difference between danger and discomfort. The brain is not wrong. It is just outdated. It is still responding to old conditions, old threats, old moments when change truly did mean harm. And until that alarm is recognized for what it is, not an enemy, but an echo, it will continue to steer life quietly toward the familiar. Even when the familiar is slowly emptying out. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from wanting a different life, but never stepping toward it. Not because the desire isn't strong, but because the fear is stronger. People who fear change are often deeply aware of what isn't working. They notice the dullness, the repetition, the quiet sense that something essential is missing, and still they stay. This creates an internal split. One part imagines, the other part restrains. One part looks forward, the other pulls back. Every day becomes a negotiation between longing and protection. This is not indecision. It is an inner standoff. Desire speaks in images. In moments of clarity, late at night, during long walks, in the silence before sleep. It whispers, "There is more than this." Fear responds with evidence, with memories of what went wrong before, with logical reasons to delay, with reminders of everything that could be lost. And fear usually wins, not because it is louder, but because it feels responsible. Over time, this conflict becomes draining. Energy is spent not on living, but on managing the tension between what is wanted and what feels allowed. People begin to downsize their dreams, not all at once but gradually. They stop imagining too far ahead. They stop asking certain questions. They learn how to make peace with less, while quietly resenting it. This is where fear of change does its most invisible damage. It doesn't create obvious suffering. It creates muted existence. Life continues. Bills get paid. Days pass. But something remains unresolved. A low-grade grief settles in, not for what was lost, but for what was never tried. People tell themselves they are being realistic. But realism, when driven by fear, becomes a cage disguised as wisdom. And the most painful part is this: the person knows. They know there is a gap between who they are and who they could become. They feel it when they see others take risks. When a moment of envy appears, not because they want someone else's life, but because it reminds them of their own suppressed longing. This is not jealousy. It is recognition. Wanting more does not disappear. It waits. And when it waits too long, it turns inward, becoming numbness, becoming bitterness, becoming the quiet belief that life is happening somewhere else. Not because the door was locked, but because the hand never reached for the handle. Awareness rarely arrives as a breakthrough. It arrives as a quiet discomfort that no longer leaves. At first, it feels like restlessness, a subtle irritation with routines that once felt tolerable, a growing impatience with conversations, environments, even versions of the self that used to feel sufficient. Nothing dramatic has changed, and yet something has. This is the moment when fear of change begins to reveal its cost. Not through panic, through stagnation. Life starts to feel repetitive in a way that no longer feels safe, only small. Days blend together. Weeks pass without markers. And the familiar no longer provides relief, only dullness. This is where people often become confused. Because they did everything right. They chose stability. They avoided unnecessary risk. They protected themselves. So why does it feel like something is slowly draining? Awareness shows up as a question that refuses to be silenced. Is this all? Not said with entitlement, but with quiet disbelief. People begin to notice their own avoidance. The opportunities dismissed too quickly. The conversations postponed indefinitely. The decisions deferred until some undefined future. They notice how often fear speaks in reasonable tones. How convincingly it disguises itself as patience, timing, or responsibility. And for the first time, the pattern becomes visible. This is not the moment when change happens. It's the moment when denial ends. There is grief here. Not loud grief. Private one. Grief for the years spent waiting to feel ready. For the emotional energy used to stay comfortable instead of alive. For the parts of the self that adapted so well to safety that they forgot how to expand. This awareness can feel unsettling, because it removes a certain innocence. Once the cost of staying the same is seen, it cannot be unseen. The fear of change no longer feels like protection alone. It feels like a trade. Safety in exchange for growth. Control in exchange for depth. And yet, even now, fear does not disappear. It watches closely. It warns. It tightens. But it is no longer invisible. This is the turning point, not toward action but toward honesty. The person is no longer asking, "What if I fail?" They are quietly asking, "What if I don't move at all?" And that question lingers, not as pressure, not as urgency, but as a gentle, persistent awareness that staying the same has its own consequences. Consequences that are no longer abstract. Consequences that are being lived. Safety for a long time meant control. It meant knowing what to expect, knowing how things would hurt, knowing exactly how much disappointment to prepare for. This definition once kept a person intact. But safety is not static. What protects at one stage of life can imprison at another. As awareness deepens, a subtle shift begins. Not toward bravery, not toward action, but toward reconsideration. The question changes. It is no longer, how do I avoid being hurt? It becomes, what am I slowly losing by staying protected? This is where a new understanding of safety starts to form. Safety begins to look less like certainty and more like trust. Not trust in outcomes. Trust in endurance. Trust that discomfort will not be fatal. Trust that uncertainty can be survived. Trust that the self is more resilient than it once had to be. This does not mean fear disappears. Fear remains, but it softens. Instead of screaming danger, it becomes information, a signal, something to be listened to, not obeyed without question. People begin to notice moments when fear shows up too early, too intensely, protecting against threats that no longer exist. They recognize that the nervous system is responding to echoes, not current reality. This realization changes the internal relationship with fear. Fear is no longer treated as an enemy to defeat, nor as a commander to follow. It becomes something closer to a younger version of the self. Still vigilant, still cautious, still trying to keep everything from falling apart. And like any part that learned its role in crisis, it needs updating. Safety expands. It begins to include the ability to recover, to adapt, to rest after uncertainty instead of preventing it altogether. This is not a leap. It is a widening. Life is no longer framed as a series of threats to avoid, but as experiences that may challenge, and also reveal, what has already been survived. The person does not suddenly become someone who loves change. That is not the goal. The goal is something quieter. To stop equating stillness with survival. To stop believing that movement automatically means collapse. Safety becomes less about staying the same, and more about trusting that even if things shift, the self will not disappear with them. This is how fear loosens its grip. Not through force, but through understanding. Living with movement does not mean chasing constant change. It means allowing life to breathe. For people who fear change, movement once felt like erosion, slowly wearing away everything solid. But over time, another image begins to form. Movement as a river, not rushing, not violent, just continuing. The fear does not vanish. It walks alongside. It still tightens the chest before unfamiliar conversations. Still whispers caution before decisions. Still scans for exits. But it no longer holds the steering wheel. Living with movement means understanding that fear can exist without dictating every outcome. That uncertainty does not have to be conquered to be tolerated. That growth does not require dramatic reinvention, only permission to shift. This is how change actually enters the lives of those who once avoided it. Quietly, in small adjustments, in slightly braver honesty, in moments where staying still begins to feel heavier than stepping forward. Movement becomes less about destinations and more about responsiveness. Listening to inner signals instead of suppressing them. Letting curiosity coexist with caution. There is grief here too, for the time spent frozen, for the selves that waited patiently in the background. But there is also relief. Relief in no longer pretending that safety comes only from sameness. Relief in recognizing that stability can include motion. The person does not become fearless. They become spacious. They stop asking for guarantees before living. They stop delaying life until conditions feel perfect. They accept that some uncertainty is the price of being fully present. And something unexpected happens. Life begins to feel wider, not louder, not faster, just more alive. The fear of change does not disappear, it transforms. From a wall into a companion. From a warning into a reminder. A reminder that something meaningful is unfolding. And for the first time, movement no longer feels like loss. It feels like participation. If parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you recognized itself here, you are not alone in this. Fear of change is not a personal failure. It is a language the nervous system learned when safety mattered more than possibility. and many people are still carrying that language silently. If you'd like to stay connected, this channel is a space for exploring the unseen emotional patterns that shape how people live, protect, and grow. A place where the hidden corners of the human heart are approached gently, without judgment. You're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments, only if it feels right. Sometimes putting words to an experience helps someone else feel less alone in theirs. And if all you do is listen, that's enough too. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.